Hello, and welcome to the first of our free gardening lecture series, all about roses. My name is Anila Nair, and before we begin, I just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A window. And also, the presentation is being recorded, and you will receive a link in your follow-up email within a few days. So let's get started. Okay, a little bit about myself. I've been a master gardener for 2 years. I'm also a Georgia certified plant professional. I worked in the software industry for about 13 years before switching careers to become a librarian. I also love reading, obviously, one of the reasons why I'm a librarian. So yeah, give me a greenhouse and a library, and I'll be the happiest person on the planet. So today, I thought we'll start with one of the most famous sayings there is out there about roses. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name will smell as sweet, by William Shakespeare. Today, we're going to discuss about the different types of roses, a little bit about how to plant them, how and when to plant them, about pruning and fertilizing the roses, some common pests and diseases, and a little bit about companion plants. So before we begin, I want to mention that while this class is appropriate for almost everybody here in the US, this is mostly the information is more accurate for zones 7 to 8, which is most part of Georgia. However, if you are outside of this hardiness zone, please reach out to your extension office if you have any questions. So when we talk about roses and rose types, I know it can sound a little complicated because there are so many different varieties to choose from, so many different types, and it can get a bit hazy if we don't know what exactly it is. So basically the roses, they're classified into 2 different types based on their growth habit and also based on their ancestry. Ancestry would mean usually where they originated, what their parent rose plants are, things like that. And the growth habit would mean whether they are climbing roses or rambling roses or miniature shrub roses, etc. So wild roses are one category based on ancestry. They're also called species roses. The most common examples would be Rosa canina, also known as dog rose, Rosa levigata, which is Cherokee rose, and Rosa rugosa, which has a lot of different varieties. The original, I would say, is called just Rosa rugosa, which is a pink flowering rose. And then you also have many different hybrids within the same category, like Frau Dagmar Hartop, and then Rosa rugosa alba, many different types of roses. Old roses, also called antique roses or heritage roses, are again further divided into old Asian roses and old European roses. So Asian roses, as the name suggests, originate mostly from Asia. And some parts of Central Asia as well. China roses, tea roses, noisette roses, these are all examples of Asian roses. Although the noisette rose was actually a chance seedling found in the US, but because of its parentage, it is classified as an Asian rose. And the old European roses, some examples are Gallica roses. If you know of apothecary rose, that's a good example of that. Alba roses, damask roses, which Ispahan, Pizalnik, all those varieties are damask roses, very fragrant varieties. Centifolia roses, moss roses, and bourbon roses, which are very popular or were very popular in France and especially the French court. And then we have the modern roses, which are their parentage can be traced back to the old roses. And they are hybrid teas, hybrid musks, hybrid polyanthus, floribunda, etc. We'll go through the differences between all of these in the next slides. And as I mentioned, Based on the growth habit, you can have shrub roses, which are, a lot of us have that. We see that, even when driving down, you can see them on the medians. The knockout rose is one of those. We have miniature roses, ground cover roses, not very popular, but still they're there. Climbing roses, rambling roses. We'll discuss the difference between the climbing roses and the rambling roses in the following slides as well. So wild roses or species roses. Rugosa rose, one of my favorite roses, because if you are into culinary uses for rose, then this is one of the best, in my opinion, for that, because the petals, if you have tasted a rose petal, you'll know that most of them can be bitter. But so far, I've found that the Rugosa rose petals are very sweet. And so if you make like rose jam or things like that, and even for rosehip jelly, Rugosa roses produce in my opinion, or as far as I know, one of the biggest rose hips among all other rose plants. They are native to Japan, Korea, China, and Siberia. And as I mentioned, they have big rose hips that you'll see in the fall if you don't deadhead them. And they can be used for culinary uses, as I mentioned before, for making rosehip jelly or rosehip syrup. They are very high in vitamin C, and they are very good tasting as well. And another example would be the Cherokee rose, which is the state flower of Georgia. It is a rambling rose. And the name Cherokee comes from, even though they are from Asia, when they were brought over to the US by European settlers, the Cherokee nation is supposed to have taken a liking to them, and they spread the rose to different parts of their nation, which is why it is called the Cherokee rose. The only thing about Cherokee rose, though, is that the flowers are very small, but they are born in clusters. So when they put on a show in spring, they last for about 2 to 3 weeks, and it looks gorgeous. However, they can be invasive. And if you drive around in Georgia during that time, early spring, you will see a lot of white flowers climbing up trees and things like that. That's usually the Cherokee rose. And they also produce a lot of hips, rose hips, but they are very small. But if left alone, it's very good for birds and such. They absolutely love it. Then there is a dog rose. This is another example of the wild rose. This is native to Europe, Northwest Africa, and Asia. It is a climbing rose, and it can also be invasive, but their rose hips are also very useful. It is said that during World War II, in Europe, especially in England, they used to go around collecting the hips, the rose hips, to make rosehip jelly and syrup to feed the children, because they are high in vitamin C to prevent scurvy. So it is a good source, but again, these days I'm not sure how many people actually make use of it. But it is a pretty rose, and I think it deserves its place. It deserves to be mentioned. Now, these are China, again, part of the old roses or Asian roses, China rose. These have been cultivated in China for centuries, if not for millennia. They are repeat blooming. This is one big difference between most other Asian roses, because the other ones that I just mentioned, not all of them are repeat flowering. You might get some repeat with the Rugosa, but the others are all one-time flowering, whereas the China rose is an exception. It is repeat flowering, which is why it's been used to produce a lot of the new modern hybrids. The repeat flowering quality comes from the China rose. However, that being said, they're not especially hardy, which is why they've been used to hybridize to create more hardy varieties, namely the modern hybrid roses. And Rosa chinensis, Rosa multiflora, all these are examples of China rose. However, I have to mention that the Rosa multiflora is, if you have that in your yard, it's better to take it out, because it is said to spread, or it gets infected very fast with the witch's broom, or I'll get that name, but I'll mention that later. Some of the examples are Hermosa, Fabrier, etc. Tea rose, is another type that is also native to China, and it gets their name from the characteristic smell of tea leaves. The roses have that smell. Apart from the rose fragrance, they also have subtle smell of tea leaves. They are also repeat flowering and medium-sized bushes. Again, not very hardy, just like the China rose. Some examples are Anna Oliver, Duchesse de Brabant, etc. Now, Noisette rose, as I mentioned earlier, this is a China rose. It is considered a China rose because of its parentage, because of its ancestry. It is derived from Champneys pink cluster, which is a product of Rosa muscara and a China rose. And the story goes that Champney, who was the president of the South Carolina Rose Society at one point, this is long back, he gave some of the seedlings to his friend Paul Noisette, who was a Frenchman who settled in South Carolina. And in his yard, obviously it flowered, and the seeds that were produced, the seeds found inside the hips, he sowed them, and he got some seedlings, which he sent over to his brother in France, Louis Noisette. And it is said that their father was the head gardener to King Louis XVI. And they found it to be very useful. They found that the plant is very hardy, and it has a repeat flowering quality, which was not very known at that time in Europe. And so they started selling it, and that's why it's called the Noisette rose. Some of the good examples are Blush Noisette, Madame Alfred Carrier. And Madame Alfred Carrier is a white rose, a whitish, very light pink shade to it. That has its own history. If you're aware of Vita Sackville West, it is said that when she and her husband bought Sissinghurst in England, before the ink dried on the agreement, they went and planted this plant. And I have that in my yard, and I have to tell you that it is very sweet smelling, and it does repeat. And even in the heat that we have in Georgia, it's done extremely well. And it is a climbing rose. And the fact that it is a repeat flowering rose is an absolute plus, because the smell alone is so good. And some other European roses are Gallica roses. These, we were talking about Asian roses till now. The European roses, as the name suggests, they may not have originated there, but at some point they did spread to Europe, and they have been cultivated there for a long time. Gallica rose, for example, there are like 2 or 3 sports to that. The picture that you see there is called Rosa Mundi, and this is a sport of the apothecary rose. And again, apothecary rose is called that because the apothecaries of that time used the rose for many different cures, and they also smell really good. However, they are once flowering plants. They are about medium-sized bushes, but when they are in bloom, they bloom profusely, and if you keep deadheading, you will keep repeat flushes during that time. Usually they flower in early to mid-spring. And yeah, they are also, most rose bushes or rose plants, the flowers, you can use them for culinary purposes. And this is one of those flowers that I have in my yard, and I have used it successfully to make rose petal jelly. And you can taste the rose scent, if that makes sense, when you eat it. So it's a very good plant to have in your garden if you have space for it, if you don't mind the once flowering, because they are so worth it. The next one here is damask rose. That is native to Central Asia. However, because of their exceptional qualities, namely the smell, they were brought over to Europe and became very popular. They are used in the perfume industry. If you're familiar with Bulgarian rose products and things like that, most of them are derived from the damask roses. Examples would be Isfahan, Kazanlik, and they smell so good. Again, edible flowers. However, the first two, Isfahan and Kazalnik, are once flowering, whereas Quatre Saisons is a repeat flowering damask rose. Alba roses, these are hybrids between the Gallica, namely the apothecary rose, and the dog rose, Rosa canina. And if you are into history, a little bit of tidbit for you. If you are aware, if you know about the War of Roses, it is said that the House of Lancaster, their red rose is actually the apothecary rose. That is what they say. And the Alba rose, namely Rosa alba semiplena, that's the rose of York. And when finally Henry VI and Elizabeth of York got married, they put the two flowers together, the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York, to create the Tudor rose, which is not a real rose. But apart from the history, this is, again, a very good plant, really good fragrance. However, it'll only flower once. Alba maxima, Great Maiden's Blush, these are all examples of Alba roses. Bourbon roses, again, extremely fragrant plants. However, when you look at all the other roses in this group that you have seen so far, this is the one that is most susceptible to black spot. That picture that you see there is from my yard. Very fragrant rose, full rose. They say there are different ways in which you can say like single flowering roses, double flowering, and this is an example of a full rose, full flowering or full flowered rose. They get their name from Ile de Bourbon, which is now Reunion Island, and it is said that it is a hybrid of Old Blush and Quatre Saisons, which is a damask rose. So, they got the best of both parents when it comes to the fragrance, and they are repeat flowering. But as I mentioned, they are susceptible to black spot and mildew. Some good examples are Souvenir de la Malmaison. Great history behind it too. Apparently, Napoleon got that plant for Empress Josephine, and Malmaison was their residence. It's named after that. And Madame Isaac Perrier, that's the rose that is pictured here. Now we have the modern roses, hybrid tea rose, Polyantha, Floribunda, grandiflora, etc. Hybrid tea rose is a cross between hybrid perpetuals, which is again a cross between the China rose and Portland roses and tea roses. These are large, they have large flowers held on straight stems, good for cutting if you're into flower arrangement. And most of them have fragrance, and they are available in all colors except blue. The DNA for the color blue is not found in roses, at least so far, whatever studies we have done, we haven't found it. Scientists haven't found it. And they repeat flowering. Good examples would be Mr. Lincoln, which is a red flowering, red colored rose, beautiful plant. So far, I haven't had any issues with that one, but smells really good. Peace rose, this is another one with a really good history behind it. The creators or the hybridizers of Peace rose, it is said that during World War II, they were afraid that because of the Nazi invasion, they would lose this. So they sent the seedlings to their friends in the US, one more country that I forget right now, and Germany, of all places. And the one that came to the US was then marketed and became very successful. Perfume Delight is another one, Just Joey. These are all good examples of hybrid tea rose. The next one is Polyantha, which means many flowered, from the Greek poly, meaning many, and anthos, which means flower. These are small shrub roses, but they bear clusters of small flowers. The one pictured here is the fairy rose. Beautiful plant. It doesn't have much of a smell, but they bloom continuously. They haven't stopped flowering for me in my garden. And they have bushy growth and they are repeat flowering, as I mentioned. While some of them have fragrance, Fairy doesn't have that. Cecile Brunner is another one which has fragrance. Because of their compact shape, they are good for edging, along the borders and stuff. Floribunda roses, these are a cross between the hybrid tea up above and the polyantha right below that. These flowers are held in clusters, and these are more disease resistant compared to the other two. And they are available in many colors, but most of them are usually bred for the look rather than the scent. However, they are high performers in the garden. I don't have many issues when it comes to diseases. It will happen, especially in Georgia, because of our summer weather, and we get rain and then it gets really hot. So it is hard to find something that doesn't get any diseases, but these are very resistant. And they are repeat flowering, one of the reasons why they're bred. A good example would be iceberg, Cinco de Mayo, that's the one that is pictured there. And they come in so many different colors, absolutely beautiful plants. Iceberg can also be used iceberg does come in climbing as well as shrub rose varieties. Both are great hardy plants. And the shrub rose can be used for, not for edging, but for like border. And they do perform, like throughout the year, you will get good flowering. And grandiflora roses, they mean large flowered. However, they have fallen out of fashion for some reason, but I included because, it is one of the varieties and I wanted to talk about it because they do have some good varieties. They are larger than the hybrid teas and the floribundas, and the flowers, they look like those of hybrid teas, and they are born in like small clusters, like 3 to 5. So it's not like a massive cluster that will bend and snap during heavy wind or rain, but it can be used for cutting. Queen Elizabeth, rock and roll, that's the one that is pictured. It's a variegated rose, and it does look like that, even in high heat. This is a picture from my garden, and I have found that even in high heat, you can see the variegation, and they do smell really good. They smell like old roses. Okay, so now based on their growth habit, as I mentioned earlier, you can have climbing roses, rambling roses, miniature roses, ground cover roses, and the shrub roses that we just talked about. A lot of them were shrub roses. Climbing roses, some good examples are Don Juan, which is the one that is pictured here. It is as red as it comes, and really nice big flowers, beautiful flowers, and good smelling too. They have the scent of old rose. Peggy Martin, which has a beautiful history, well, kind of devastating, but it's like story of resilience during Hurricane Katrina. This is also called the Hurricane Katrina rose. During Hurricane Katrina, when Louisiana, New Orleans was devastated. And one of the ladies living there, Peggy Martin, when she came back to her house, everything was lost and everything was submerged in water for weeks. However, when the water finally receded, this one survived, this one rose survived. And as a symbol of resilience, this is now being marketed as, and in honor of the lady who had the rose in her yard. It's called Peggy Martin, or the Hurricane Katrina rose. It is a vigorous climber. I'm surprised it doesn't belong to the Rambler family, because it does, it's very vigorous. And it's one of the easiest to propagate, I would say, for home use. Another one would be Madame Alfred Carrier that I mentioned earlier, which is a bourbon rose. Rambling rose, the difference between climbing and rambling rose would be that climbing roses, they would reach up to 8 to 12 feet. However, rambling roses grow out truly vigorous. They don't know when to stop, and they flower just as vigorously, but they don't all flower repeatedly. In fact, I can't think of any that repeat flowers. They're mostly one-time flowering plants, but when they flower, they put on a show. Some of the good examples are Kipsgate, the Albrighton Rambler, Ladybanks, that's the one that is pictured there. Paul's Himalayan musk, etc. They are known to climb up trees, very tall trees, swallow your house, pull children off the streets, etc. Well, I'm joking, but they do grow really vigorously. And we will talk about them again when we talk about pruning. Miniature roses, the cube roses, they are called miniature because they don't grow as tall as the shrub roses. Some do try, but they're not always successful. They remain very compact, and but they do again put on a really good show. The flowers are small, but a lot of them flower very vigorously, quite a lot of flowers, and most of them are repeat flowering. Maybe some older varieties might not be, but a lot of the ones that I know are repeat flowering. I haven't found a lot of miniature roses that are scented. One exception would be Sweet Chariot, which is pictured here, which is very sweet smelling, and it has the smell of old roses. Gourmet popcorn, it looks just like popcorn when it's in bloom, which is pretty much all throughout the growing season. Denver's Dream, which is a sort of a orangish yellow color, but really good performers, again, for our Georgia weather. Ground cover roses, these are good to have, if you have a retaining wall or something, to have them drape over the retaining wall. They look really pretty. Some of the examples would be drift roses. They come in many different colors, coral drift, peach drift. I believe there is a yellow drift. There are many different colors, and they are worth it. They are great performers in the garden. Rainbow Happy Trails, that's the one picture there. I don't have it, but I would like to get it soon because it looks so pretty. Now going on to the difference between, yes, we're going to talk about planting now. When it comes to planting, you can do it two ways. You can buy bare root plants, or you can buy the potted roses. Now, the difference between bare root roses and the potted ones is that, as you can see in the picture on the left, that's an example of a bare root rose. You will get a lot of selection if you are going that route, because it doesn't take a lot of space for the growers obviously they need big garden and land, a lot of land to grow them. But once it's done, it's done on an industrial scale. And because they are shipped as bare root plants, the cost of shipping is very low. And I've also heard that they harvest them and then keep them in the refrigerators until they're ready to ship out to customers. So it's a lot cheaper for them to produce that, and you will get a lot more colors and a lot more variety if you are buying the bare root plants. Fall is the best season to plant roses, bare root or otherwise. However, if you buy plants from, say, David Austin Roses, they usually ship plants out in the spring. But if you can get your hands on bare root roses now, it's a best time, because in the fall, once it's fall, they're not putting on any new growth up top. They can focus on root growth. So this is the best time to do that. And there are different recommendations for planting them. Again, David Austin Roses in some places recommend burying the bud union. If you can see that over here, that's the bud union. They say that bury that at least 2 inches. I'm not sure if you can see it. I hope you can, what I'm showing on screen. 2 inches below the ground level, because, and this again, you don't have to do that if you're in Georgia, because our temperatures, even in the winter, it doesn't go that low. The reason they say this is because if something happens and the top part, which is the grafted part, the plant that you want, dies off, you will just get whatever is the grafted part of the plant, which is usually not what we want. That's why if you bury it 2 inches under the ground level, then they will form roots there, and it'll make sure that you will get the plant that you ordered. But again, in Georgia, it's not that scenario. I don't think it'll ever happen unless there is like climate change and something drastically changes. So you can plant them with the bud union above the ground level. And now on to the potted roses. These are expensive to ship because most of them are shipped with the container. You can buy them from the garden centers. However, the choices are limited. The good thing about potted roses, though, is that you can plant them anytime during the year, as long as the ground is not frozen and you can, dig the ground, you can plant them. But I wouldn't fertilize them after fall. Now about pruning and deadheading. Pruning is done for two reasons: to encourage the plants to flower better and to keep them to the size and shape that we want in the garden. And pruning is usually done, again, for Georgia. This is usually done in late winter when the bud swell happens. So the bud swell is when you see new growth coming on the canes. You cut just above the bud, depending on how tall you want to maintain the plant. And it is said that you should cut above the bud union where the bud is pointing outward and not inward, because you don't want the canes to cross. And there are the pruning methods for rambling roses and climbing roses are not the same as the ones for the shrub roses. The one that I was talking about was for shrub roses. You need to make sure that, first of all, you take out any canes or limbs that are too thin looking. If they look sickly, take it out. And again, when the bud swell happens, cut above the bud, which is pointing outward, so that they'll grow into a nice vase-like shape with enough room between the canes for optimal air circulation. That'll help prevent diseases. And yes, they can be pruned at any time, but as I mentioned, they are usually pruned in late winter. Rambling roses, however, are pruned right after flowering to maintain the shape. That's the only reason you would do that. It's kind of impossible to prune them to, you can hack at them if you want, and they do tend to take over. But since most of them are grown on trees or next to the houses, sometimes you do need to make sure that they don't overtake or take over your house. The climbing roses, the way you prune them is there are two types of canes. The canes that come from the base, called the main canes, and then the canes that come from the main canes. They are called the lateral canes. The lateral canes are the ones that bear flower. So when you train a climbing rose, you can train them in different ways. You can train them horizontally because that encourages the hormones that create lateral buds to create more lateral canes, which means more flowers. So you arrange the main canes horizontally, and you only prune the main canes if the length of the main cane has gone beyond what you want. Otherwise, we would prune the lateral canes to about 4 buds. So if you have, I don't know if you can see it, if you have a main cane and there's a lateral cane growing, from where it's attached to the base or the main cane, you would count 4 buds and you cut above that. Again, when you're cutting or pruning that part, make sure the bud just below that is growing outward and not towards a structure where you're training this to. And it can be trained against buildings, side of your house, or trellises. It's better to train them when the main canes are very young, so that you can wind them as tight and as close as you can to the trellises. And yeah, climbing roses are also pruned in late winter. Only side shoots are pruned. Shrub roses are pruned to maintain an open vase-like shape, prune above a bud, and cut back dead canes and crossing canes. It's very important to cut back the crossing canes because when they keep rubbing against each other, that causes injury, which makes them susceptible to pathogens. So we don't want that. So anything that's crossing, cut them back to the base and to the base of the stem where they come from, and also cut back any dead canes. Very important to make sure that the pruning shears are clean. A lot of the diseases and pathogens spread because the tools are not clean. So you can clean them using a dilute solution of bleach, or you can use alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, to clean the shears. And deadheading is also important. Well, there are some newer varieties like knockout roses. You don't need to deadhead them. They are self-cleaning, which means the bud or the flower, after flowering, it will fall off on their own. However, most roses are not self-cleaning. So you cut them, the spent flowers, in such a way that you come back to the first set of, from the flower, the dead or the dried up flower, you come back to the first set of 5 leaves and you cut above it. That's how we deadhead them. And that will encourage more blooms. And it also keeps the plant clean and looking clean. As for fertilizing, you can fertilize the roses during the growing season. Throughout the growing season, they are heavy feeders. They need a lot of nutrients to keep producing flowers, especially the repeat flowering ones. And the time you start fertilizing is right after the bud swell in late winter. Don't worry about, the fact that it's still winter. It's fine. Roses are very hardy plants because the bud swell has already happened, which means they recognize that it's time for them to start leafing out. So it's absolutely fine to provide them with fertilizer at that time. And if you are using natural fertilizers, organic fertilizers, fertilize at least 3 times during the growing season. Once during, if you do it in late winter, that would be about February time. But once the growing season starts, fertilize them at least 3 times, once in April, once in June, and then again in August. If you're using chemical fertilizers, follow the directions on the fertilizer. You can use rose fertilizer, tomato feed, liquid seaweed, etc. Tomato fertilizer, I mentioned tomato fertilizer because if you look at the composition of fertilizers, you will see NPK, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The flowering, the component that encourages flowering is phosphorus. And if you buy, and tomato feed is very high in that because tomatoes, you need them to flower so that they'll produce a fruit. So you can use that. And I do have something that I found on the Denver Rose Society's website. Full credit goes to them. I have used this formula and it works really well for me. It would be 1 cup of the rose feed or the tomato fertilizer, plus 1 cup of alfalfa meal and half a cup of kelp meal in April, mid-April to mid-May. And again, in June, you can use 1 cup of, this is per plant, so 1 cup of rose feed or tomato fertilizer. And by the end of July to mid-August, you can again apply 1 cup of rose feed plus 1 cup of alfalfa meal and half cup of kelp meal. This, as I mentioned, I've tried it myself and it's worked really beautifully. It's given me a lot of good results. Again, credit goes to the Denver Rose Society. I found it there on their website. That is for shrub roses and climbing roses and rambling roses and all that. However, for miniature roses, you don't have to fertilize that much. This particular formula, you don't have to apply 3 different times. You can apply them once in the same amount, or actually it's less than that. I'm sorry. It's 1/3 cup of the rose feed, 1/3 cup of alfalfa meal, and 1/6 cup of the kelp meal. That's a combination for miniature roses. However, apart from that, you can also apply liquid seaweed, which is very high in nitrogen. You can apply that directly to the base of the plant or as a foliar feed. You would mix the seaweed according to the directions on the bottle with water, and in a spray, you can pour it into a spray bottle and spray the foliage with it. And apart from all the fertilizers, if you can give a side dress of compost, good quality compost, homemade or store-bought, that's also very good. It'll not only act as a mulch, but also the nutrients in the compost will keep feeding the plant. Mulching will help prevent the loss of water and also will help suppress the weeds. Now on to the common pests and diseases. In the spring, early spring, you might see aphids, the little green insects or creatures that you see on new shoots and flower buds and all of that. They tend to pierce the stem or the shoot with their mouth part and suck the sap out of the tender shoots. While it's not really lethal to the plant, it is unsightly, and if it is a young shoot, it can leave it distorted. And also they excrete something called honeydew, which attracts a black fungus called sooty mold, which can look very unsightly, as I mentioned, because it looks like a black, it's not even a spot, it's like it's covered in black color, black substance. So it can cause damage, because if it covers the entire leaf, then it won't be able to photosynthesize and it can cause major problems. And ants, if you see ants near the aphids, they're not eating them, they are farming them because they like the honeydew produced by aphids. So ladybugs are a good natural predators for aphids. You can also just hose them down. They might come back, but it's usually when the buds are very young, so you don't tend to see them a lot after spring. So manual control is what I would suggest. Japanese beetles are a big problem. They are an invasive species. They have chewing mouth parts, and they tend to eat pretty much everything from the leaves to the buds to everything else. And they emerge in mid-May and are present throughout the growing season. They live from 30 to 45 days, but they do breed and the eggs will hatch. And they can cause quite a lot of damage. There are bags that you get from big box stores. I don't recommend that because they tend to attract, while you will get a lot of bugs in that bag, if you put that as a trap, the hormone traps, you might attract more from your neighbor's yard. So it's better to either control them manually, which is going around your garden, and they if you're familiar with fainting goats, and if you know how they fall to the ground when there's a shock, it's similar. These Japanese beetles pull a similar thing. If you touch them, they will fall to the ground and scurry and bury so fast you won't be able to find them. That's their defense mechanism. So what we can do is go around the yard, if you don't have a lot of plants, with the jar containing soapy water, and hold them under the Japanese beetles. And when you touch them, as they pull their diva routine and try to fall to the ground, they'll instead fall into the jar of oblivion. So that's one good way to control them. Another one, a more preventative one, would be to use something called milky spore. They get affected by the milky spore disease. I'm not going to read the name of that, but you can buy that milky spore and apply that in the ground so that the grubs and the Japanese beetles will get infected and they will die off. Black spot is another major problem that you will find with roses. We can't help much when it comes to that because, especially in Georgia, because of the warm, damp conditions, it might happen. Even to the disease-resistant varieties, it might happen. So applying fungicides is one way to control them. But even then, unless you repeat that, it will keep on happening. If the conditions are right, it will still happen. And the best thing you can do is to clean up under the base of the plant when the infected leaves fall, and they can infect the stem as well. So cut off any stem that is infected, collect all the leaves that are infected, and do not compost them, throw them away. Powdery mildew, again, very unsightly. Everything from leaves to buds to stems and thorns, everything gets covered by this dusting of white powder. These are also spread by airborne spores. And these are because of the dryness of the plant roots and poor air circulation. So disease-resistant varieties, if you can find them, that would be a good way to go. In my yard, for example, touch wood, I don't have a lot of powdery mildew issues. There are some varieties that are susceptible to it, and they get it every year. Again, clean up it's the same thing that you would do for black spot. Clean up everything, leaves, affected parts, and trash them. Do not compost them. So to prevent the dryness of the roots, you can apply mulch. That'll make sure that there is some moisture present at the base all the time. And the fungicide, use of fungicide is also effective in treating them. Rust is another disease that is spread by the wind. This is a very bad one. It can pretty much kill the plant if not controlled or if not taken care of at the right time. They spread from early summer, and you will see these patches of orange on the stems and the leaf stalks. If you detect them, the disease at the right time, and prune all the parts and throw them away, that will help. And make sure that, this is why it's important to prune them right, so that there's enough air circulation, and so that, they don't get infected. And also pruning out the stems that are crossing, therefore preventing any injury, making them more susceptible. You can use a copper fungicide in the spring. I would recommend applying them in the fall as well, so that the overwintering spores won't be able to get to the plant. I haven't seen many cases of this, at least not in my yard or anybody that I know of, but it's good to know. Rose rosette disease. This is the one that I was talking about earlier, when I couldn't get the name quite right. Also known as witch's broom. The multiflora rose, which is an old rose, is very susceptible to this. So if you have that in your yard, it's good to remove that. And this is spread by a mite. It's a wingless mite. So they travel in the wind, and they travel on your clothes. So if you have gardeners who take care of many different yards, they could bring the disease into the yard. Nothing we can do, because we don't usually detect them with our human eyes. And it's very important. This is one of the reasons why it's very important to clean the tools as well. Every time you go from one plant to another for pruning or whatever else, sterilize the instruments, sterilize the tools, so that disease won't spread. However, once it's there, it could look like, it actually looks a lot like herbicide damage to the plant. The leaves and the buds are all distorted and looks really bad. You will find some really weird growths happening, but nothing much that we can do once the disease settles in. It's better to remove the entire plant, including any roots, and bag them and dispose of them. Do not compost them. And now for the companion plants. These are just a few that I put here in the slide. There are many more, but these are based on what works well here in Georgia, as well as my own experience. However, like I said, there are many more companion plants. As long as roses need at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight per day. So any plant that needs similar conditions are a good choice. color-wise, you know, however you want to do the planting. If you can find something like that, it's great. Alliums go really well. It also prevents, it is said to prevent aphids. I haven't found it that effective, but maybe I don't have as many aphids because of alliums. Yarrow is another good one, and they come in so many different colors. It's easy to mix and match them with the color of your rose. Nepeta, vigorous grower, beautiful colors. If lavender doesn't work for you, Nepeta could be another choice, because even though they are two different plants and look different, the color scheme is pretty similar, and they smell great, Nepeta. So that's a good choice. Salvia, this is the hot lip salvia. Any kind of salvia. Roses are not are not deer resistant, but salvias are. However, interplanting them won't help. Deer would just go for the rose and leave the salvia alone, but they do look good together. And because it's a strong smelling plant, it can deter other pests from getting to your rose plants. Thyme, again, culinary uses apart, it is a really great plant. It smells good, and they do bloom as well, and bees tend to love them. So it's good to have them near the rose plants as a ground cover. They can act as a living mulch. Foxgloves are another great choice. You know, if you have climbing roses and you want something that grows kind of tall, not as tall as a climbing rose, but still tall. So if you're layering your border, foxgloves are a great choice. They also come in so many different colors. Marigold, this is calendula. This is a picture of calendula. Even though they are cool season flowering, they do overlap at times. So it's a good choice. And you can plant the tropical marigold. They go great with roses. And of course, lavender. Roses and lavender are a great combination. You would think that lavender, being from the Mediterranean area, they don't need a lot of water. So how would they go well with roses? They actually do. They don't mind the rain that we get here. They do really well here in Georgia. There are some varieties that does well than others. Phenomenal is something that I believe was bred for our weather, and it does exceptionally well here. So that is another one. And it's beautiful, nice smelling combination to have. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. I wanted to let you all know that we do have a program called the Georgia Green Landscape Stewards Program, created by the University of Georgia Extension. And if you need more information, you can go to the website that you see below to find out more. And if you would like to connect with us, these are all the different links to our social media network. Feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you may have, or questions, concerns, anything. Also, if you're not from Georgia or even from Georgia, please reach out to your extension office if you have any questions. And yes, I forgot to mention, sorry. Thanks to our promotional partners for spreading the word about our free gardening lecture series. And also a big thanks to our media partners for spreading the word. And Dana, do you have any questions?
Yes, we actually have many, and we'll get to as many as we can with the time that we have left. We have a question. Anila, can you please recommend your favorite knockout pink rose for the Alpharetta area?
Knockout, I believe it comes, the pink rose, there is one pink rose because you have knockout red, knockout pink, and knockout yellow, which is called sunny knockout. And then there is one white knockout. But I think they do come in double flowering or single flowering. But apart from going and asking the garden center about, asking specifically for the pink knockout rose, I don't think there's a specific variety name for that.
Okay. What is the best way to fertilize roses during the summer?
As I mentioned before, the formula that I just gave you with the rose feed or tomato feed and the alfalfa meal and kelp meal, it works really good. But if you don't have the time for that, you could apply Osmocote, the granules that you get. You would just have to follow the directions. They usually feed for 3 to 4 months, which is a good time period for that. But because roses are heavy feeders, I would also supplement that with either liquid seaweed fertilizer or bone meal or something like that. If you're putting bone meal, make sure that you're mixing it in with the soil so that critters won't, dig it and eat it or whatever. Even dogs tend to go for them. So mix them in with the soil and they should be fine. Yeah.
Great. Also, in your presentation, Anila, you mentioned your noisette rose. What rose do you grow in your garden that repeat blooms and is fragrant?
Oh, I have about 67 roses in my garden, so it's hard to choose. Are you looking for a noisette or any? If it's
yes, the question was specific to noisette.
Well, Old Blush is a great one. It smells amazing. So I would recommend that. But if it's just generic, any climbing rose, it's hard to choose, but I would say Madame Alfred Carrier smells amazing. And also Don Juan, definitely.
Great, thank you. One other person asked, I have a Joseph's Coat rose bush that I planted spring 2021, which receives 6 to 10 hours of sun per day. This year it's been struggling with spotty leaves, minimal leaves, and flowers that don't seem as big as they should be. I fertilize every 2 weeks with a granular powder in a watering can. How do I make my rose bush more lush and flowers bigger?
Yeah, Joseph's Coat is one variety that is very susceptible to that, which is why as soon as I heard the name, I was like, yeah, that's the one. I'm so sorry it's happening to you. I know, you invest so much time and effort and it happens, it doesn't feel great. Georgia weather is not very ideal for that. However, you could try the preventative methods that I mentioned about the fungicide, applying the fungicide. That might help lessen the black spots because, like I said, in Georgia, it is bound to happen, which is why it's important to select disease-resistant varieties. But applying the fungicide might help. And for lush growth, follow the regimen, apply. If you apply, I would say in the beginning, to make sure the plant grows well, don't worry about the flowering for the next year. Apply a heavy nitrogen feed so that the bush will grow strong and healthy. And the next season, continue with the regimen so that you will get more flowers out of it.
Great. Somebody asked, they want to plant low maintenance, sweet smelling, repeat blooming, hardy, disease resistant, and drought resistant roses. What would you recommend?
You want sweet smelling as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Okay, here's one. I was about to say knockout roses, but they don't have smell, except for Sunny Knockout. If you don't mind the color, and it's not a bad color at all. It's yellowish, but in the sun, it looks kind of very pale yellow to white. They smell absolutely great. And they are self-cleaning, as in you don't have to deadhead them. They're vigorous. I don't even feed them that much because I know they are very hardy. That's a good choice when it comes to knockout because you want sweet smelling. Another one, I would say, well, this one, it's not great on smell. The fairy rose, it's done exceptionally well in my garden. Like again, because it's a miniature, I don't apply a lot of fertilizer, but they've not stopped flowering at all. So give them a try.
Where in Alpharetta can one get good fragrance rose plants?
The local nurseries would usually carry, Pikes is a good place for that. they would usually carry a lot of rose varieties in the beginning of the spring. Another way, it doesn't matter where you are, you could try a lot of online nurseries. David Austin is one. High Country Roses up in Colorado, they sell potted roses, but these are not big plants. These are small starter plants, but if you don't mind, and they'll grow really fast. So if you don't mind waiting a year or two, you can get really healthy plants for not much of a shipping rate from High Country Roses. So that's another option. Antique Rose Emporium down in Texas is another good nursery, online nursery. But if you want to buy locally, then one of the local, even in the spring, you will find good roses, even in the big box stores. Not much of a selection there, but I've seen Pike has a lot of good selection, locally.
Yeah, and I've actually seen Autumn Hill Nursery in Woodstock has a very good rose selection as well.
Mm-hmm.
What type of fertilizer, Anila, is best for polyantha type rose bushes, zones 8, 9 in Georgia?
So when it comes to roses, if you are looking for flowering, the key factor is the phosphorus. And which is why I said it doesn't even have to be a rose feed. If it's a tomato fertilizer, it is absolutely fine. Look for the middle number, high middle number. That will ensure good flowering. And again, I would go back to the same formula that I mentioned above. Because it has worked so well for me, I would highly recommend that.
Thank you. What are the sun, shade, watering requirements for roses? Are they all the same? Do any of the rose varieties require minimal hands-on care?
Knockout roses don't need much care, which is why you would see them along the medians. They will take pretty much all abuse you can throw at them. But in your yard, if you want more variety, sun requirements, pretty much all roses need 6 to 8 hours of sunshine. But if you look online at many different varieties, some might say for shady areas, don't get confused by that. That doesn't mean you can put them in shade along with your hostas. That won't work. It just means that it might need the lower end of that full sun requirement. So if you can get morning sun in Georgia, that's the best, because afternoon sun can be scorching and it's not ideal for roses. So preferably morning sun, but my backyard faces the south, so I get all day sun, but they do well. So morning sun, watering wise, do not water the leaves. That's what will cause a lot of the diseases. You don't want wet leaves, especially once the temperatures go high. That's not a good combination. Water the base, and when to water it's a judgment call. Because we get a lot of rain in Georgia, it depends it changes from year to year. A couple of years back, I remember I had to water them more frequently than this year, where I may have had to go out maybe a handful of times, maybe less than 10 times, when I've had to actively water the plants because we got so much rain. So in peak summer, keep an eye out for the plants. If they look tired, wilted, and that's when they will also get diseases. So if they look tired and don't look their best, check the base. Always check the base. You don't want to keep watering and then, if it doesn't drain, especially with Georgia clay, that will only cause more problems. So constant checking is the way to make sure whether they have enough water or not, and then water accordingly. Yeah.
Thank you. Which type of rose is best for an arbor? Would you say a rambler or a climbing rose?
It depends on how big your arbor is. If it's like you have plenty of area for seeding and stuff like that, then I would definitely recommend a rambling rose, like ladybangs or even Paul's Himalayan musk. I would recommend them. Because they do love to spread, and you will have to maintain them by pruning them to keep the size at some point or the other. Otherwise, they'll take over, they get heavy, and it can cause damage to the structure. But if it's not huge, like maybe a small table or something like that, and you don't want to cover the top part, you only want them winding around, the pillars. climbing rose would be better.
Okay. If ground cover roses will hang over a retaining wall, how high will the plant grow? Less than 10 inches?
That depends on the variety. Absolutely depends on the variety. So I can't say for sure. If you look up, if you have a plant in mind, you can look up online to see their growth habit. Completely depends on the variety.
Okay. Do you have any information about a shrub named Ducher, or Ducher, white shrub? Haven't had much luck growing, even though bought from an Alabama nursery.
I haven't heard of that. I'm sorry.
Doesn't sound like it's a rose, probably. Do you have a suggestion for a good white shrub rose?
Iceberg roses, the shrub type, not the climbing one, definitely. The white knockout roses, absolutely great plant. If you want rugosa, the Rosa rugosa alba, but you don't want to plant that anywhere near people might walk because they are very thorny. But if it's in the back of the border, absolutely, why not? Because you get really good hips in the fall. And even if you don't use it, you know, it's good for the birds. So yeah, and there are many more, but these are what comes to mind right now.
I have a young misplaced climbing rose. Can I transplant it? If so, when?
Fall would be the best time to do that. Dig them up. Now is a good time. Yeah, now till end of November. In fact, in Georgia, again, if you can work the ground, it's fine, but I would do it in the fall. Dig them so that you get all of the root ball or most of the root ball. And you might have to prune them for ease of transfer, but it's absolutely doable. Yeah.
Somebody indicated that they're new to roses. Can you please briefly explain the terms canes, bud swell, rose hips?
What was the first one, Dana?
Canes.
Oh, canes. Okay, so canes are stems. And I think I mentioned that or maybe I mentioned it throughout. But for regular roses, like shrub roses, the most common, I would say, kind of roses, those are just the stems. For climbing roses, like I mentioned, there are two types based on where they come from in the plant. The ones that come from the ground up, those are the main canes. And on those main canes, you know, the side canes that you get, side shoots that you get, those are the lateral canes. So the lateral canes are the ones that produce flower. And those are the ones that you would prune when it comes to a climbing rose. The main cane, which originates from the ground up, that you would only prune when it gets too tall to your liking. You can maintain that. Or if you're training it against a wall, let's say, and you've stretched it, the main canes, you have stretched it horizontally, and you don't want to go, you don't want them to go any farther than that. That's when you would prune them. Otherwise, you would leave them alone. But the lateral shoots are the ones that you would prune back to the four shoots. You know, so you have the main cane, and then I don't know if you can see my finger. You have the main cane, and then you have the lateral side shoot. So you would count from where it's attached to the main cane, 1, 2, 3, 4, and above the fourth, but you would cut them. That's how you prune them.
Thank you.
And there was something else, bud swell. So bud swell is, if you look at a stem, the stem of a plant, the rose plant, you will see these bands sort of on the stem. And you will see the growth coming from there. That is bud swell. So in late winter, when the plants feel like, okay, it's time for me to flush out and, you know, put out the leaves, that's where you will see the new growth. And the beginning of that new growth is called bud swell. Was there anything that I missed?
Rose hips.
Rose hips. So those are essentially the fruits. If you've ever wondered how these hybridizers are creating so many different hybrids, it's an arduous process, but the flower, if they're pollinated, they will form fruits, which we call rose hips when it comes to roses. And depending on the plant, some don't even produce hips. Some of the hybridizers, the reason they select a plant is because they don't want any fruits, because they're all about flowers. If you have fruits, a lot of the energy would be spent on making sure the fruit and the seeds within them will grow, and because it's propagation or reproduction is the reason why those fruits are there. So all the energy will be spent there. So instead, most people want flowers. So hybridizers started selecting plants which doesn't produce hips, which means, they just don't do anything after they are done flowering. You can just deadhead them. But a lot of the older varieties, and even some newer ones, if you don't do anything to the flower once they're done flowering, and if they're pollinated, the seeds will form in that ovary of the flower, and it's encased in this fruit, which is the rosette. And the best fruits or rosettes, according to my opinion, is the Ragosa roses. Rosa moaceae is another one which has really big hips, but it has a sort of an elongated shape. Dog rose is also good, but the Ragosa rosettes, you can actually eat them. As long as you don't get the seeds in your mouth, because they're hairy and nasty, you don't want that. But the fruit itself tastes kind of tomatoey, plus maybe a little bit of apple kind of taste. Not much, but a little bit. But it's very edible. You can eat them straight up. You have enough pulp that you can eat, or you can use them in cooking or even flower arrangements. People do tend to do that as well.
Okay, another question, and we're getting down to just a few more that we can answer during the time that we have left. My roses have witch's broom. Which should I pull them out, or are they a lost cause?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm so sorry. It is better to pull them out because these are airborne. As I mentioned, it's a mite. It's a wingless mite that spreads this disease. If you don't take care of that right now, it can spread to other plants. So the best thing would be to bag them and dispose of them. Do not leave them there. And after you're done, any tools that you might use for that purpose, sterilize them before you use that on another plant. Yeah, unfortunately, it is a goner. Sorry.
Yeah, that applies also to rose rosette disease, correct?
It is the same. Witch's broom is the same as, rose rosette. Yeah.
Do you suggest pruning double knockout roses after they bloom during the summer?
You don't have to. That's the reason why they became so popular. They are self-cleaning, although they don't fall off immediately. They will dry. The spent flowers will dry on the stem and eventually fall off. So if you cannot stand that sight, absolutely go for it. There is no harm in that, but you don't have to.
All right. And the last question that we have time for is, please tell us more about deer protection for roses. If we use those with bad smelling products to fend off deer, what's the point in having wonderful smelling roses?
Yeah, good point. And I'm sorry to say this, but I have a lot of deer problem in my backyard, and I've tried pretty much everything under the sun. Nothing really works. The products that you can apply, that deter deer, they actually wash off in the rain. So you'd have to reapply, and you have to really keep up, like on top of that, be on top of that, or it won't work. So unfortunately, the best thing you can do is to fence off or provide something like deer netting or something. And even the deer netting, unless it's tall enough, they will just jump through, and they can't see their eyesight is not really great. So I've had deer run through the deer netting, and it's like didn't stand a chance, and they got to pretty much everything. So when it comes to deer resistance and roses, do what you can to actively prevent the deer from getting to the plant by deer nets, not the bird nets. If you have snakes, they'll get caught, and it's not a great sight. Actual deer nets, which are the ones with the wider squares and stronger material, and T-posts, that'll work as long as they're tall enough. And even if it's just around one plant, if the deer, they will do anything to get to it. So if you can make sure they can get to it, great. Otherwise, if you have a fenced backyard, great. Nothing else, unfortunately, will work with roses.
Okay, and there was a few questions, and I'm just going to directly answer them. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send all of the attendees today links in a follow-up email in a few days if you want to listen to the recording again. We'll also post the recipe, if you will, that Anila spoke to of the fertilizer that she recommends from the Denver Rose Society. Back to you, Anila. Thank you.
Thank you. And please join us next week for Make Time for Herbs in Your Garden at 2 o'clock, a great class. And if you would like to register for that, please go to the link below, the nfmg.net community classes link. And also, if you miss a class, you can watch them later on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Fulton Master Gardeners. And we do have something called Give and Garden. So please support our fall 2022 Give and Garden online sale with the purchase of beautiful plants for your garden. Your plant purchases will help NFMG continue to provide quality horticultural education to all of our North Fulton community and beyond. And for each order, 50% of the proceeds will go directly towards helping NFMG meet our goal. Thank you for your continued support. The link is right there, and the sale is already active. The last day to order is November 1st, 2022. And the orders will start shipping around late September to early October. And please don't forget to fill out the survey. Thank you so much for spending your lovely Sunday afternoon with us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, and you all have a great day. Bye.